guys, welcome back to Of Stone and Clay. This is episode 123. Today we have an awesome guest, Trevor Hanson. Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having me here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Trevor is a licensed therapist and coach, and you kind of specialize in anxious attachment and trying to not have that attachment, trying to be secure.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit how you got into that and why that became a passion for you.
Yeah. So I never really planned on going this route
Yeah.
and being like a therapist or
Mhm.
anything of that nature. And I kind of lived in this unconscious world of being insecure myself.
Mhm.
And insecure usually comes down to kind of two things. One is that you're kind of afraid that people are going to not like you,
Yeah.
abandon you, reject you, whatever words you want to use.
Yeah.
You feel like people's love is a bit scarce and that you're maybe not so worthy of having it,
Mhm.
right? And that's kind of the second piece, is this I'm not good enough kind of
Yeah.
sense. And I think I operated from those two places for a long time,
Mhm.
growing up, having that. And I was actually telling my wife a story the other day where it was really present, something that she never heard me say, where I'd talked to this girl for a really long time, and it was long distance, and then finally we were in person and a relationship started flourishing, and I just laid on the love, right?
Mhm.
Way too much. And she was like, oh my gosh, I gotta get out of here. So she bailed out, and I remember telling her this story of me wandering around my backyard, almost like this feeling of anguish and almost anger at the girl for pulling away,
Mhm.
just this real desperation, and almost crying and borderline almost kind of yelling, just pleading to make
Yeah.
it work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so that underlying anxiety of having somebody is kind of the idea of the anxious attachment. And I had no idea, I'd never heard that term
Right.
or anything. And from that point, I mean, it would be years later until I decided to do what I'm doing now. I went to school. I went off to BYU Hawaii, and still anxiously attached,
Mhm.
not really finding success in dating
Yeah.
because of that lack of confidence.
Mhm.
Came home from Hawaii, started a job at Tesla, started working a corporate career,
Mhm.
still blind to the issue and really
Yeah.
what it was. And I think I had a few real kind of powerful events in my life. I broke my jaw. I got laid off from Tesla in
Mhm.
a nationwide layoff. I had a relationship with another person who was equally, and if not maybe more, insecure in their own selves and
Mhm.
unhealed wounds, and that created a lot of chaos. And that relationship was bound for marriage. There was an unofficial engagement,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it's kind of everything all at once
Mhm.
kind of happened, right? And I think I'm a big believer in God, and I feel like it was God's way of getting me off the path that I was on, both career wise and personally.
Yeah.
And I'm incredibly grateful for it, because from that experience, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. I guess I'll go to therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that the right answer?
Right.
Sure. It's an answer. So I started going to therapy, learn some things, started going to some groups and all sorts of stuff, picking up whatever I could, little
Mhm.
random bits off social media and books and podcasts, and hoping that it was going to work for me, and
Yeah.
kind of taping it together. And it took a long time because of that. But in the end, I found a lot of the healing, and I feel like I got some real solid direction from a divine source to say this is what you now need to do, is help others to heal the way they see themselves, meaning
Mhm.
they see themselves as worthy
Yeah.
instead of unworthy, and the way they see others, meaning they can see others as trustworthy, as loving, and being
Mhm.
able to understand who is trustworthy and who is loving and who will be there for you.
Yeah.
And if they're not there for you, how might you still find peace? Those are kind of the questions that I help people answer. And so the whole goal now and the passion is help someone transform deep down in their bones, not just in their logic, right?
Mhm.
But deep down, feel that sense of worthiness, that sense of trust, that ability to be in a healthy
Yeah.
relationship. So that's in short what
That's
it
awesome,
was.
man. So what is how big a part of that is just sort of building self-esteem and self-love and
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and it's a huge question because
Mhm.
there's so many pieces that go into it. But at its core, building your self-esteem, or it's so funny because there's so many words we can use for it. I actually rarely use self-esteem. I don't know
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
but like other words like self-respect, self-compassion, like all of those, it really is at the core of becoming secure.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it is because the person who's a bit more insecure, anxiously attached, tries to essentially create safety externally from
Yeah.
everybody else around them, right? I need the validation. I need you to tell me that I love you. You love me. I need the good morning text. I kind of need
Yeah.
in order to feel okay and stable. And some people will just be in relationships that are mediocre, or they don't even like, because they need somebody to fill up their cup.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in what we do, and I've got kind of a community, we call it the Secure Self Club. And one of our, I guess, doctrines or our tenets is all about security is defined as creating an internal environment of safety where you feel safe, and it's not contingent on what's happening outside of you.
Right.
You can still be sad if your partner doesn't show up for you in the way that you need, but it doesn't destroy your entire sense of self and peace.
Yeah. And it sounds like you can still have we still have sort of intrinsic insecurities, that like probably won't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But you can kind of be secure in your insecurities. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's a mix of two things. I talk about how we want to heal the core wounds that create a lot of insecurity. So for example, maybe you grew up with a highly critical parent, and that core wound, if we were to put it in words, it sounds like, I need to make others happy in order to be loved, so that I don't receive that criticism and they'll stay close to me. And so if we heal that core wound, you naturally start feeling a lot more secure. Your triggers, maybe when somebody is a bit more critical, it doesn't feel like the world is ending and you're fine. It doesn't even affect you. And then where we can't necessarily annihilate them and get rid of all those triggers and all those insecurities, we then learn how to navigate through and manage the insecurity when it comes, right? You might still feel the anxiety. You might still feel a little bit hurt when, somebody is a bit more critical, especially a partner, but you're able to stay intact, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I feel like for me, I have my little insecurities, but I feel like I'm a pretty secure person, right? But I feel incredibly more secure when I'm with someone that is a very good communicator. And so if they say something that feels a little off or a little hurtful, I can just be like, hey, what did you mean? Or what was that about?
Yeah.
And because they're a good communicator, they'll be like, oh, like, I'm sorry, I meant this. And but when I'm spending time with somebody that's maybe not a great communicator, I feel like it's easy to feel insecure because you're like, I can't go to them and have these hard conversations.
Yeah. And what I think you're also describing there is that most of the time you will feel secure with people who are also secure, and good communication is kind of what I call a happy side effect of being secure.
Right.
Yeah, it happens naturally because when we're insecure, we're more likely to do things like just get defensive, let's say, right? Somebody, has some sort of critical view of us, or we think that that's what's happening. And if you're insecure and you don't totally feel safe within yourself and you're afraid that you're not good enough, then you're going to jump to a defensive position instead of maybe a curious position. Like, oh, when you said that, like, what did you mean by that?
Yeah.
Like, give me more of the story and I want to get clear.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's really cool cycle where the more secure you are, the more you help others behave in a secure way.
Yeah.
And you're able to attract that kind of healthy love.
Yeah. I love that. I saw in one of your posts you said, and I want to hear a little bit more about this, you can't think your way out of emotional pain.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And I definitely, like, when I read that, I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, you have to go do the work, but sometimes you're like, well, isn't part of the work just thinking?
Yeah. Great question. So the kind of little catchphrases I like putting things in little phrases because it helps me remember, right? As I always say, information does not create transformation.
Right.
It's that you must feel something to heal something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's the distinction, because it's like, well, isn't thinking part of the process? Yes. I think thinking and logically putting together an awareness of your issue, right? You're like, oh, wow, like I respond with defensiveness and highly critical when somebody doesn't show up on time, for example. Oh, that's because my mom was inconsistent on showing up for me. Okay, that makes sense. I have this revelation, but that revelation isn't going to change your life until it's coupled with some sort of emotional experience. So that's why we talk about creating an internal environment of safety for yourself, right? Filling, for example, the unmet needs of childhood. Maybe you're going to then keep appointments for yourself moving on. It's like, okay, if I set an appointment with myself to go to the gym or, go swimming or do something I like that might seem less important, I'm going to keep that with exactness. And I'm going to notice the feeling that comes from respecting myself. Oh man, that feeling that you're getting, that's healing you deep down in your bones. You're kind of taking that part of you that's scared and triggered when people don't show up on time, and you're kind of like holding it and nurturing it, saying, I'm going to show up for you every single time. I got you. And that's the emotional experience that creates real transformation. Does that make it more?
I love that, because it all comes back to, how can I like nurture myself? How can I take care of myself?
Yeah. One thing I tapped into recently on that front that I feel like is really powerful in the Secure Self Club, as people come in, one of the first things we do is we help them identify some dailies, some things they do on a routine basis. Because people often complain, I go to therapy like once a week and it's great, but then I feel like I'm just relying on my therapist. Like there's nothing in between and I need routines. And we're like, okay, great, let's do this. So we call them dailies. And one powerful method of establishing a daily routine for healing and anxious attachment is by identifying what is the unmet emotional need that I had in childhood, and then what is a daily routine that I can do now to meet that need, because it still exists within me. So maybe you weren't listened to as a child and you just longed for somebody to hear you. Well, I've got one of my students on the way home, she voice records how her day was, and she just talks to her phone. And then halfway through her drive, she pushes pause on the recording and just listens to it back with some compassion. And she'll even pause and respond to herself and be like, I'm really glad you're excited about that now. Or, yeah, that was super hard, and just giving her quite literally the unmet need from her childhood. And my goodness, that in itself creates the healing experience that we're talking about, the emotion. She reports like, I'm driving home and I'm just like crying, just feeling so cared for. And I'm the one doing it.
Right.
Ooh, that gives me chills.
I think I heard Jordan Peterson say, like, if you want to have good self-esteem, do esteemable acts. Like,
totally.
You're just sort of, the more good things you do, like, you're going to feel better about yourself. Right.
And you have to be a little careful there too, though, because if, especially in the world of anxious attachment, sometimes you start tying worth to accomplishment. And so you start chasing this kind of like, oh, the more I, keep the rules at church, or the more I get the good grades, or the more I perform, the more lovable I am.
Right.
And so it gets a little bit tricky, but I totally agree with that. I think where there's a lot of lack of doing good works is especially pointed towards the self, not in a selfish way, but in a self-caring way. And that could look like challenging yourself. It could look like the classic, like, bubble baths and relaxation and all that stuff too. But I think that's where a lot of times we just, skip out. Is just, okay, I need to nurture and take care of me. I
want to hear how you met your wife.
So I met my wife. It was awesome. So it's so funny you're talking about these things, because I was talking with her about them yesterday. And today's our anniversary, so that's cool.
Awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. It's funny, this morning she's like, what day is our anniversary? And I was like, it's on the 11th. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the 11th. Happy anniversary. But so it was shortly after a different skiing accident I had, because I talked about breaking my jaw. That was skiing. I actually shattered my eye socket in another accident. And it was years after the first one and years after the breakup and all that. And I was in school for my master's in marriage and family therapy, and I had shattered my eye socket. And at that point, I remember I spent a few days in just darkness. Like I just had my one eye was literally sewn shut after the surgery, and then the other one was weeping so much that I couldn't really open them. And so I just kind of sat in a lot of quiet and a lot of darkness with my eyes closed. And when you do that, you have a lot of time to just talk with God and think and ponder. And I remember just a lot of surrender in those prayers, just asking God to, guide me however he sees fit, whether it is to find somebody tomorrow or find somebody years from now. Like, I just want to let go and kind of do your will, which is really an approach to security that I don't hear a lot of people talking about online, which is like, you feel way more secure when you believe that there's a solid plan in place that you have no control over.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, that's kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you've got me. And so I remember after that, I think that was kind of like the capstone to, I don't know, capstone. I mean, I'm still working on it, but at that point, that was kind of the capstone to my healing. And I was so fresh off the injury that even when I met my wife, I still had a black eye on our first date. And it's funny. It was just a message on Instagram.
Oh, nice.
I followed her. She followed me back. You like a photo. She likes a couple back. You make a comment, right? Yeah. Yep. The whole process. And then it was just, hey, do you like tacos? Because I do. You want to go get some? And she says yes. And so, but what was cool is she was asking me actually yesterday, how did you, like, what was different about that date? Because it really was. And I was like, honestly, it just, I was different, first of all, on that date. I was letting go of the outcome. Whatever happens, happens. And I was able to recognize in her a lot of playfulness and fun, which I loved. We're getting tacos and I'm like, should we try like the eyeball tacos? Like, she's like, yeah, let's do it. That's cool. And so that was fun. But also, I just noticed this kind of calm, present consistency that was security. I was seeing her as a secure person. And it was just deeply attractive. And I was able to see her that way because I had already been that way. Like, I'd done my healing. I think when you haven't done your healing, secure people can often feel boring to somebody. And so you're going to miss out on actually the most healthy partners when you haven't done your healing.
Or you can feel like you don't deserve that.
Right? Yeah, totally. Totally.
What was the sort of the tipping point for you of realizing, like, okay, this girl's different. Like, I'm starting to really fall in love. Like, I might be toast.
I don't know if it was a particular tipping point. I think it was a lot of consistent experiences. And I think that's one thing I would encourage people to look for is like consistency in the things that matter the most to you, and be really honest. Because if you're anxious and insecure, you're going to make up stories in your head and you're going to make up excuses in your head for a person not being consistent in the most important ways. And but she was consistent. I didn't have to make up excuses and be like, oh well, I believe love is really scarce, so I'm going to stay here. But things that were huge for me was just her adaptability and her ability to, I guess, suffer well is what I call it.
I like that.
Yeah. She just knew how to suffer.
Just with some grace.
Yeah. And with a lot of humor, honestly. Like, I remember one day we were going to go out riding scooters, like electric scooters. We had a couple of them in the garage with the boys I was staying with, and it was just dumping rain. And she was like, let's still go. And I was like, okay. So we like put on ski goggles and like jackets, and it was the best experience of my life. And I know that's kind of a silly version of suffering well, but it carries the same principle of like, I'm going to adapt and actually make this a more enjoyable experience and pull the meaning and the purpose out of the suffering. And it's one of our most memorable times in our life. We talk about it still.
Yeah. That's great. Do you feel like in a marriage, and you've done couples therapy as well, right?
I started there primarily.
Okay.
And just really recently started to focus specifically on just the anxious attachment.
Gotcha. Do you feel like in a marriage there is some sort of like limit to the things you should share with your partner, or do you feel like you should share everything? Like every negative thought, everything that might, anything that might be hurtful, might be counterproductive, or do you feel like it's best to just get 100% out on the table?
Yeah. I definitely don't think it's important to share everything, especially the unfiltered version of
Sure,
everything,
sure.
right? I think if there's some sort of either like obviously things that are clearly established as we need honesty around these things,
Hmm.
then yeah, you probably need to be really honest, right? But I think we are quick to become maybe annoyed or frustrated with our partner about things that maybe matter in the moment,
Yeah,
and we may not have the words to express why they
yeah,
matter to us or what's really going on, the deeper story. And we might just focus on the behavior, right? Like,
yeah.
you always leave your shoes here or whatever. And we might come down real hard on our partner and throw in all sorts of judgment
Hmm.
about it. And mind you, the anxiously attached, they'll do this all the time because they'll see something like leaving your shoes in the place where I told you not to leave them as a symbol that you don't care about me.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa,
It's a lot of projection.
super, super big. Yeah. And then it'll come out from the anxious as criticism.
Hmm.
You don't even care about me. You don't love me. You leave your shoes there. I told you 100 times not to do that. And you never listen to me. It's like, you don't care about the words I say.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, whoa, the story just got way bigger.
Right.
Right. And so if they were to, some people will say like, oh, I'm straight up and I'm really honest and I'm such a good communicator. They're not good communicators.
Right.
They're good criticizers, and they need to learn how to morph criticism into the actual message that they're trying to send,
Yeah.
such as, hey, when you leave your shoes there, sometimes it does make me feel kind of bad because I tell you to move them. And I know it's probably not this way, but a story goes off in my head that says, what I say to you doesn't really matter.
Right.
Whoa, that hits different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, and in that example that I gave, I'm also taking ownership. I'm saying there's a story going on in my head.
Hmm.
I'm not saying this is reality and you don't care
Yeah.
about me.
Yeah.
It's judgment free. It's I got the story in my head that you don't care about me, and yeah, it's really hard. I just don't know what to do about it.
Hmm.
It's like, whoa, we're in a collaborative conversation instead of a combative
Yeah.
conversation.
And that feels like that feels like a conversation that, because it's so intense and so like instructive, it doesn't need to happen every single day. You know,
No.
you have a conversation like that and you're like, wow, okay, maybe I'll try to be more mindful about where I throw my shoes or
Yeah.
whatever. But when you're just bickering about little things, you tend to have that argument again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not
Because you're
impactful.
like, okay, so she whines when I do this, but I don't think it's a big deal, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it goes back to the principle that we talked about. The bickering is information and it doesn't create transformation.
Yeah.
It's the information. You leave your shoes there and I get mad at you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Pretty surface level information. But the emotional transformation happens when the person who leaves their shoes there realizes that, wow, my shoes being there holds a deeper meaning. And my shoes being where they should be shows you that I really love you and I really care about
Yeah.
you. And because they feel that love for their partner, they have an emotionally moving experience, their behavior naturally changes and they hardly even have to try.
Yeah.
You take that person, they're going to put their shoes on the shelf every time.
Right.
They're not going to leave them there. And it's because they felt something new.
Yeah.
I love that example.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that makes it. And what about sort of the opposite, where someone's inclination is to maybe not criticize, but to just sort of silently resent?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there we start to, and just depends. So there's kind of if we're talking within the lens of anxious attachment, and this, I guess, let me clarify something real quick before answering this question. People say like the anxious and the avoidant attachment. What you're describing on its face sounds like avoidance because it's silence. It's the person who goes quiet. At the heart of both anxious and avoidant is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
It's insecurity. It's the question marks around, will you love me? Will you be there for me? Am I enough? Are you going to be consistent? And they're both protecting themselves in different ways.
Yeah.
One might point out the problem and try to fix it, and one might just kind of run and build resentment. And the anxiously attached will do their own version of the go quiet and the resentment, but they'll do it through people pleasing. They're a bit more active. They're not just going to go silent. They're more likely to lean in and try to make everybody else happy in order to be loved, right? I'll do my song and dance and do everything you want so that you don't leave me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance between being someone that wants to be very generous and very giving and gregarious and all these things and wanting to please people, but also finding the balance to be like, okay, well, I also need to take care of myself first. I need to nurture myself. I need to find space for myself to be happy maybe before I kind of like when
Yeah.
you're on an airplane, they tell you, take care of your oxygen first.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's checking your motivation is
Hmm.
huge.
Okay.
If you're seeking to make others happy, which is not a bad pursuit, that's a beautiful
Sure.
pursuit to increase someone's happiness. But if if you're seeking to make somebody happy out of a place of fear, that's people pleasing.
Mm,
If you're seeking to make somebody happy out of a place of love, that's being loving.
yeah.
And can you overextend yourself in a place of love? Sure,
Yeah.
you can. But you're also going to recognize it and rein it back in. Whereas if you're doing it from fear, you're just going to double down. You're going to ignore the fact that you're exhausted because your fear is bigger than your exhaustion and your resentment. And so you push past it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with, even if you're a pretty secure person, how do you deal with heartbreak? What's the
Mm.
best way to sort of sit down and be like, okay, I want to deal with this in a healthy way. I
Mm-hmm.
want to heal the
Mm.
best way I can, but I realize like, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and I realize like it might be a long grief journey, but
Yeah.
how do I sort of, if I go through a horrible breakup or something, what's the best way to kind of prep myself to like not be in a dark hole for too long?
Yeah. So there's a false narrative that's talked about on the internet that a secure person, when they experience a breakup,
Hmm.
that they just go, okay, it was great dating you.
Right.
Love you. Bye.
Right. Right.
That's not true at all.
Yeah.
That is not true at all. That's
Yeah.
an unfeeling person.
Hmm.
But the concept that these other people are trying to communicate is the idea that the secure person is still going to be okay and that their peace long term
Hmm.
isn't contingent on this relationship
Yeah.
succeeding.
Yeah.
In the short term, it can be wildly disruptive.
Right. Right.
To think that you're going to grieve over somebody that you loved is loving. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
To think that you're going to be angry about things that happen in the relationship for a time makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Because maybe you had something taken from you, a person taken from
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
something that you loved. And so I think really acknowledging the fact that you're going to feel that for a time and saying, it's okay that I do,
Hmm.
there's deep security in that.
Yeah. Yeah. My last breakup, I found myself feeling like, okay, my peace is completely disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like it was a weird combination where I felt like, okay, I was the one rejected, and
Yeah.
so it does feel rather personal, and
Yep.
it does feel like I know I'm still worthy and I'm a good person and all these things, but I still feel like, well, if I was X, Y, and Z, she wouldn't have left me,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But ultimately, I was like, I'm grateful for what I had.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The love I felt was beautiful and it was real.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to be sad for a while, and that's okay.
Exactly. That's the
And
conclusion.
I was.
Yep.
And there, it was there was lots of emotional undulations that I went through,
Uh-huh.
and there was periods where I was fine, and there was periods where I was like, dude, I thought I was pretty much over this girl, and now I'm just
Wrecked a
feeling
little.
horrible
Yep.
again. But yeah, there was some peace in knowing that like I was fine before her,
Mm.
and I'll be fine after her.
Yeah.
It's just, I think I realized more than anything it was just a loss of a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always going to bring hurt.
Yeah.
And the idea that you go unfeeling into the future is not the definition of being a secure person.
Right. Right. What do you do when you feel like your sadness is being a little too protracted? It's been there
Mm.
longer than you'd like it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. This is honestly one of the hardest questions to answer.
Yeah.
Because I think in the world of like mental health, we've been trying to find a good answer for grief.
Mhm.
We've been trying to find a good answer for depression. And they can be related and they can happen at the same time. And really, we haven't found a great answer.
Yeah.
Even a body of research. And there's things that are helpful,
Mhm.
but even to give you like a little thought or a tip or a trick around it almost feels like I'm doing an injustice.
Yeah, it feels trite.
Yeah, it does. Not that there aren't things in my head floating through right now that I'm like, well, that that's really helpful,
Yeah.
right? For example, like a lot of people feel like they need closure in order to
Mhm.
feel okay. And one of my favorite reframes around that is like, oftentimes you're not going to get closure. They're not going to talk to you again. They're not going to say sorry. The things, you're not going to be able to go say goodbye to their family or
Mhm.
whatever it is. Sometimes the closure that you get are the lessons that you learn from the pain of the experience.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I can take that as my closure, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And it's probably a mistake to assume that had you gotten that closure that you really wanted in that specific way, that you would be 10 times more healed,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And again, you're putting your piece contingent on somebody else doing something. And what that leads to is a perpetual victim mindset
Mhm.
where the world is in charge of how you feel. And when you feel bad, then it's the world's fault.
Yeah.
And not to say like it's your fault if you've been abused or your fault if this, because I would never want to like project that narrative out there. But I do love kind of the extreme ownership mentality of saying it is my responsibility.
Mhm.
Let's put blame and fault aside because it
Yeah.
never really helps, but it is my responsibility moving forward to find some peace.
Mhm.
And I'm going to relentlessly seek for it until I do.
Yeah.
And if you have that mindset, you will find it. I was in that position
Yeah.
post that, breakup, the laying off, all of those things. I remember I was in a relentless pursuit to find peace again. It was the only time in my life where I'd wake up just heavy, physically heavy,
Mhm.
and it's the only time in my life that I had a panic attack. I like
Mhm.
pulled over. I was like, what is going on? I feel like I'm going to die right now.
Yeah.
What is this? It was the only time where almost every day waking hour was just a real struggle.
Mhm.
But the relentless pursuit of peace was always there.
Yeah.
Always.
I love that. It's almost like you're viewing your peace and your happiness and your healing journey as like you have to be tenacious about it.
Yeah.
You have to be aggressive. And I love that word relentless.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's so everything is a balance, right? Because even as we talk about it, I do align with the idea of a bit of that aggressive pursuit.
Mhm.
And at the same time, if we take that a little too far, then it becomes, kind of hustle culture,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, maybe I missed the mark and now I'm just like beating myself up.
Right,
Right.
right.
Sometimes the relentless pursuit or that aggressive pursuit looks like aggressively being willing to cancel some plans
Uh-huh.
so you can sit in
Yeah,
silence.
yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not doing that today.
Right.
I'm going to go hike. I'm going to go see the sun. I'm going to, whatever it is. And that doesn't look very aggressive.
Mhm.
That doesn't look
Right.
very,
Yeah, but it's aggressive in the pursuit of the peace,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
It's not aggressive in general.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I love, that's a good distinction. I like that we brought that in because it's important for people to kind of see that difference because they can get caught up again in the, well, you just got to do more kind
Right.
of culture.
Yeah.
Oh man. And that leads to a narrative of shame. And then we get really stuck.
Right. And sometimes you just have to be like, okay, today my best effort today is very little.
Yeah.
I can like I'm almost an empty vessel. I have very
Mhm.
little to give, but
Mhm.
I'm gonna give what I have.
Yep.
And hopefully I have a little bit more tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know?
Most definitely.
What are your thoughts on I've seen you talk a little bit about this on procrastination and why we tend to do it
Yeah.
and where that sort of stems from.
Yeah. So if we kind of go back to maybe the theme of what we've been talking about, that insecurity, we can call it anxious attachment, we can call it fear of abandonment, lack of self-worth, whatever it is, that little core that we're talking about. This is one of the reasons that I feel like we procrastinate and we're unaware of it is we may feel like we're procrastinating because we don't want to do something. And that's a very simple definition. But if you look behind it, sometimes you will procrastinate things that you're afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And if you fail, maybe there's a narrative in your head that says, if I fail, then I'm unworthy. Then I'm not good enough. Then I'm rejected or rejectable.
Yeah.
I've had that experience where I had a hard time feeling accepted in social circles growing up. I just did. I always felt kind of on the outside. And that feeling of being rejected and isolated is deeply painful. And I noticed one day that I was avoiding creating videos for Instagram because if it didn't do well, I noticed that there was this little subconscious part of me that said, Trevor, if it doesn't do well, And by the way, that's the voice of your inner child usually. If you hear this kind of fearful narrative that probably comes from the past, and he's going, Trevor, if you don't do well, if you don't get the comments, if people don't see it, if it doesn't move anybody, then you're not enough. And it's that same experience of being rejected. And let's not do that. Let's not go there. And I wasn't aware of it until I became aware of it. But once you're aware, you can start kind of challenging that voice a little bit. Nurturing that voice into believing that it's okay, right? Telling it truth. That part of me believed something that was false, which is if I post and it doesn't do well, then I'm not good enough and I'm rejectable. Way far away from truth. But I felt it emotionally, and logically, I knew it wasn't true. So we need to bridge that gap between the emotional part of you that believes things that are not true and the logical part of you that sees the path and goes, no, hold on. That's not true at all.
I've struggled with, I've gotten better over the years, specifically like the last few years, but I've always struggled in the past with, I just played so much sports growing up that when I didn't perform well, it felt so connected to my self-worth.
To yourself,
right? And I think part of it was growing up, that was all I cared about. You know, that was my main thing. And that was just the end all be all, you know? And so even as I got older and it wasn't as important and I'm just playing city league or I'm playing pickup or whatever. For some reason I'd have a horrible game or play really poorly. And after that, I would start to spiral a little bit and I'd be like, well, dude, I freaking suck at basketball. And this girl doesn't want to go out with me.
You stack it.
And I'm like, wait, these things aren't connected at all. But why do we do that? Why do we sort of stack our miseries?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think one just reminds you of the other. And I think if you have an underlying subconscious belief that's kind of general in its theme, so such as I'm not good enough, it can be that simple. Then anything that reminds you of that belief, then or feels like evidence of the belief, right? I didn't do well in my sporting event. Then it's like your mind kind of starts searching for more evidence at the very moment. It's like, okay, I need to confirm this. Like, oh, yeah, that girl rejected me.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like I want to hang out in this self-pity pool for a minute.
Well, and it's self-protective in a way, because if you were to walk into a dark room knowing that it's full of people, and let's say a handful of them have knives and they could get you at any point, you know, they could stab you, they could poke you, you're going to want to look around for those people and be super aware of where they are. And it's the same thing that happens to us subconsciously. We have a bias towards seeing negative things to avoid pain and harm. And so it's supposed to, whatever that means, it's kind of supposed to be helpful to recognize like, oh, this is where I'm not good enough. And this is, you know, these negative narratives. It's almost like, again, that voice of the inner child inside kind of going like, look out, you got to be aware. Here's the truth. If you aren't perfect, you're not going to be lovable. If you don't score that goal, then you're not enough. That girl rejected you because you fail in these certain ways. So fix it, right? And when you see it that way, it also changes how you feel about that negative voice in your head, because you see it with some compassion, right? It's like this little scared kid in there just going, hey, make sure everybody's okay. Make sure everybody's happy, because if they're not, they're going to leave us and it hurts so bad. And you hear that and you're like, whoa, buddy, like, I love you. You don't have to feel that way. That's not true. Whereas maybe you've turned towards that negative voice in your head with some shame. Why do I always think that way? I'm so insecure. I'm so stupid. You just double down on the negativity. But man, when you start doing your healing and you start approaching that part of you, the kind of inner child type part of you with that compassion, oh man, it changes everything.
What's a good exercise to sort of maybe get in touch with the inner child that if at first maybe it feels a little like, I don't know, silly or goofy to be like, I'm communicating with like my ghost, you know?
Well, for those who feel like so there's going to be a group of people who hear this and they're like, oh, it doesn't sound silly at all. I love that. You know, like, and they're maybe a little bit more connected on like spiritual or mystical type things or existential things. And it's like easy. For those who are a little bit more logic brained and not as much experience in the emotions, it's going to be more resistant. And for those who it's more resistant, I like to say, just remember, you have experiences early on in life that create your internal programming. We call it neural pathways. You get
Yeah.
two little neurons, they fire together and they wire together. And then you learn subconscious rules like the one maybe we've been mentioning a couple times, like I have to be perfect to be loved. And so there's quite literally a physical part of you that believes these things.
Yeah.
There's also another part of you, a logical adult part of you, that doesn't really believe those things. You're like, well, not everybody has to be perfect to be loved by me. Like, so there's at least one exception,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I think seeing it and going, well, there's quite literally a part of me that exists that I can heal. And the best way to access this is through some kind of internal dialogue. And whether it feels silly or not, I'm going to let go of it being silly and judging the experience and focus more on just the fact that, well, it's effective.
Yeah.
If it's silly, it's silly, but it's effective.
Yeah.
So that's part of where I would start. And then a specific, I guess, activity. Do you want me to share that?
Yeah, yeah.
So a specific activity that you can do to start getting in touch with your inner child is just first, a specific activity that you can do to start getting in touch with and healing your inner child is first recognize the voice of the inner child. What are the fearful things it's saying to you, right? You have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe it's telling you that you need to, double text that person because they're not texting you back. It's trying to protect you. And you start to recognize its loving intentions of protection and its methods, how it's trying to help you protect, right? I got to be the funniest guy in the room to make sure I'm lovable. That's a method. And so when you recognize its loving intentions and its methods, then you can simply, and it sounds a little silly, but kind of start speaking to it. Notice where that feeling is and just be like, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
And it's wild. I do this with people all the time. I'm like, where do you feel it? And I kind of feel it in my chest. I'm like, just let that part of you know that you see it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it'll go, and people will go, oh my gosh, that feels different. I'm like, okay, just let that part of you know who you are and how old you are. And say, hi, I'm Trevor. I'm you. I'm just older. I'm 32.
Yeah.
And I'm here to help you. And just notice what happens. And that inner child starts to respond, right? Maybe sometimes people feel resistance, like, oh, I don't want help. This is scary. Or other times it's like, yeah, I'm desperate for this help. And then you start doing things like expressing gratitude to this part of you. Thank you for what you've been trying to do.
Yeah.
You've been working so hard. Your methods, maybe we could sharpen up and change a little bit, but gosh, you've been trying to serve me and make sure that I don't get abandoned. I love you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, oh, and you feel what that's like. And then you keep going and you reveal truth to your inner child.
Yeah.
And this is all kind of an internal dialogue. And in what we do is we kind of guide people through it in our program and really specifically. But then it might look like revealing what you know as kind of the self leader, the adult self that knows the logic, saying things like, hey, buddy, I know it feels like you have to be perfect in order to be loved because maybe like mom was super critical and until you did things perfectly, she didn't show you attention.
Yeah.
But that's not actually how it is with everybody. And I'm going to love you no matter how people respond to you. And I'm going to help you find people who you don't have to be perfect for.
Yeah.
People who will accept you with love and grace. Will you trust me? And it sounds kind of weird, but there's an actual question that needs to be answered there. And you kind of ask that internally. And you start to feel kind of these answers coming back. And it's this ongoing relationship. And I've got people in our groups now who are like, yeah, I just kind of chat with my inner child all day. It's like an open line of communication. Sometimes it's out loud, like when I'm in the car, that's a great place. Or maybe it's just in my head, like, hey buddy, how you feeling? Right? I'm just checking in. The bathroom is a sanctuary. Nobody asks you, why are you going to the bathroom? You can go in there and talk to yourself all day.
Right. Yeah, just turn the fan on.
Yeah, just turn the fan on, whatever. Yeah.
That's so cool. Do you ever tell people to like write letters to your younger self?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because some things hit differently with certain people, right? There's like actual visualization. Get a photo of that little person and put them on the mirror. I did that when I was doing my work. And I remember just looking at him almost every day.
I feel like it's easy to have compassion for yourself when
Oh
you
my
do
gosh. Yeah, like this innocent little kid.
Yeah.
Right? And realizing that, oh my gosh, his same nervous system is inside of me right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the interesting thing is I feel like, and I'm sure there's some people that struggle with this, but I feel like most of us, if we struggle with some self-hatred, we don't hate 5-year-old version of ourselves.
No.
We love that kid and we know what they've been through and we we can kind of see the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
But as an adult, we're so much harder on ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I love that idea, having a picture of your younger self
Yeah.
and just being like, I got you, bro.
Yeah. And, you know, as you said that, something I've never thought of it this way, but most of the time when you're stuck in self-hatred, you think you're hating the current version of yourself, but most likely, and this is a gut punch, you're hating that 5-year-old version of you.
Yeah.
You're hating that 5, 6, 7-year-old version of you, because that version of you is the one that's that version of you is the one that's afraid,
Yeah.
that responds with defensiveness or criticism, or runs from relationships, or does all the dysregulated things that you see in yourself that you're not okay with. But all of a sudden, if you shift that dynamic and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been hating the 5-year-old version of me, it's like that can cause you to weep. That can cause you to grieve.
Right.
And when you do, you start to heal.
Yeah. Wow. I love what you said earlier. It's never crossed my mind to sort of, I mean, I've heard people talk about the inner child and talking to it, but the idea of saying like, I love you, man. Like, thank you. Thank you for all the crap you've done and all the stuff you've been through, because it's such a beautiful thought to realize like, yes, I'm the current version of myself, but I'm also every other version of myself. Like, I'm 13-year-old me. I'm 22-year-old me. Like, it's all me. And so we have such an eye towards the future, but it is beautiful to be like, let me thank myself for all these years of good that I've done and all these things I've overcome. And there's got to be a lot of power in that.
So much. As you say that, think about what you're really doing. So if we go back to the idea of filling those unmet emotional needs, right? Usually the anxious attachment at its core is you have unmet emotional needs from childhood and you're trying to get them filled by everybody else. And it's an anxious pursuit and it's not very pleasant for anybody involved. But man, even with what you just said is, you know, going back and giving yourself appreciation and validation. You know how many of our wounds sound like, I was never appreciated. I never got that validation. Nobody ever told me my feelings were okay to feel. Nobody ever gave me grace. When I made mistakes, they gave me shame instead of love and nurturing. You're doing all of those. And I'm just naming a few, right? We got 5 down. And you're doing all of them with exactly what you just said, giving gratitude, showing that you care, just speaking out the words like, I really do love you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because talking about this stuff, I'm thinking about my childhood, and it's like, I had really, really amazing and loving, evolved parents.
Yep.
And great siblings, great support system, great friends. But the reality is, as a child, we all go through pain and the moments of hurt and rejection. And I was a very scared, sensitive kid. And so I think into my teenage years and part of my adulthood, there's some insecurity from that little child.
Yep.
You know, and feeling like, well, this was fine as a kid, but it's not fine anymore to feel this way, you know? And it wasn't from, you know, an abandoned parent or a lack of love in general.
No.
But you still, like, if you go through life and are communicating and talking to people, you'll get rejected.
Yeah.
And you'll have bad things happen to you, and you'll have horrible things said to you, and you'll have these little sort of negative core memories.
Yes, absolutely. And it doesn't, people, honestly, most of the time, the trauma you experience, isn't what happened to you, it's what didn't happen for you. And it can be so subtle, right? You can have the most amazing, loving, nurturing parents, but an amazing, loving, nurturing parent could also maybe be a little bit wrapped up in their own anxiety. And in their own anxiety, they maybe project that onto you, and you start to feel anxious about the world around you. Or you feel anxious about getting mom or dad's attention because they're kind of wrapped up in their own emotional trauma or drama that's happening internally. And so again, if we can maybe come back to the example we've been writing for a while, you start to learn, wow, in order to get love or attention from mom or dad, I need to make them happy. I need to pull them out of their anxiety or out of their depression. And does that make them a bad or abusive parent? No, that makes them a normal human who had a struggle. And has it affected you as a child? Sure. Now you feel a bit of anxiety that people aren't going to be there. But what's beautiful is like, man, the idea isn't in this life isn't that we protect ourselves from all suffering.
Mm-hmm.
We learn from suffering to become the people that we are meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. What's your, maybe what you do with your wife or your general advice, but what for you do you feel like is a great way to make love sort of continually grow as, you're in a relationship and you want it to continue to grow and become something bigger and more expansive, but it's easy to just fall into routines and the monotony of life. And how do you consistently augment your love?
Emotional experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Just what we've been talking about. You need to continue to create emotional experiences through exploration. And what I mean by that is sometimes that emotional experience could be the high and happiness of, accomplishing some sort of physical feat together that was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We're hiking to the top of that mountain and watching sunrise together.
Yeah.
Awesome. It could be a vulnerable emotional experience. It's nighttime and the kids are in bed, and I'm telling you about something that's deeply important to me.
Yeah.
That maybe I haven't shared in this way before,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe in this setting where everything is quiet and I can actually hear you and I'm looking at you in the eyes, and all of a sudden we're feeling, love or compassion for one another. All of these different experiences create an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and that emotion is the connecting piece.
Yeah. I like that because I feel like if that's your focus, that's something you can pretty easily do. Maybe not every day, but probably most days.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't need much resources.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think you can do it every day,
Yeah.
even small doses, right? For me, when I'm noticing that I may be getting really busy because I'm a pretty driven dude and I got a lot going on, and I will maybe, say, okay, I'm going to take literally 1 or 2 more seconds, and I'm going to, as I'm walking through the kitchen to go to my office, I'm just going to grab my wife and I'm going to grab the back of her head and she'll be like, I love you so much.
Yeah.
And give her a kiss. And it's not like this deep, romantic, passionate thing. It's just, I love you so much. You say it in that way, it's different than like, love you, I'm going to my office.
Yeah.
And that was a micro emotional experience.
Yeah.
She walks away from that being like, woo, I feel good.
Yeah.
And I feel good.
It's a little moment to connect.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. My buddy was telling me about, he goes to couples therapy, and he said our therapist says, like, I think they call them bids.
Yeah.
And he said, anytime you like extend sort of a moment to connect with
Mm-hmm.
your partner and they reject that, it's like does a world of hurt for your relationship. But they're like, but all you have to do is accept the bid, accept that little micro
Mm-hmm.
moment to emote together and to be together and connect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like all you need to build.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
And, as you say that, it makes me think that the more secure you are, the more, and especially if you're aware that you're sending those bids for connection,
Mm-hmm.
and you also are aware that maybe your partner is or isn't in a spot to receive it, not out of a place of rejection, but just simply out of a place of being really busy,
Yeah.
then if it doesn't quite land, you're okay.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. It wasn't the time. I'm good.
Right.
I'm going to go to my office, right? Maybe
Yeah.
I'm trying to grab my wife and she's like, I'm literally wrestling this 1-year-old. Like, I cannot right now.
You're like, I want to connect.
I'm like, please look at my eyes. No.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Not right now. And it doesn't hurt because I know that I'm okay. I'm enough.
And you had one of those moments the night before.
Yeah, right.
And 2 days before. And,
exactly.
And yeah, I think if those moments of connection are sort of rare,
Mm-hmm.
then if it is rejected, then it feels catastrophic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to read this quote and hear your thoughts. This is by our dearest Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Okay.
I don't know why I just love this so much. He says, though I sit alone in a pillar, I exist. I see the sun, and if I don't see the sun, I know it's there. And there's a whole life in that, in knowing the sun is there.
I'm curious, before I answer,
Yeah.
what struck you about that?
I think it was sort of the beauty of just existence in general, and seeing like, you know what, every day I might battle like unbelievable things. I might be in the middle of the worst crucible of my life, but the sun's going to be out there, and I can go see that. and that can remind me that I'm alive
Mm-hmm.
and that I exist and that there is beauty out there.
Mm-hmm.
And but I love the sort of serenity of saying, and that's enough for me.
Mm.
I don't need anything extravagant. I don't even need all the things that I want and that I desire.
Right.
You know, like for me, there's a lot of things right now in life that I want and desire that I don't have.
Yeah.
And so I have to find ways to have peace and have happiness in just my existence and in just the existence of this planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's like it draws on the idea that like it's funny. He didn't say anything other than the sun. I see the sun, and the
Mm-hmm.
sun is there, which is the idea is like, okay, there is a day today. I'm recognizing that there is a day. There is a day of life, and life is, to call it life and to to have life is like a great, I don't know. It's like the definition of what people strive for. Like I want things to be alive. When things are dead, that is the most catastrophic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when things are alive, that is rejoicing. That's birth.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say that life is contingent on outcome. It's
Right.
like no, life includes all of the outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
the hard ones, the easy ones, the ones you like, the ones that maybe you like later because they taught you something, but they're
Yeah.
really, really hard in the minute.
Right. What happens, you think, when someone feels like they're bored in a relationship? Do you feel like that is a you problem, or
Mm.
maybe it's probably a combination of, both you and your partner have neglected certain things along the way?
Yeah. It's hard to say and give it like one blanket answer because I think there's so many factors that
Yeah.
could go into that. Because both things that you said could be true,
Mm-hmm.
right? One answer could possibly be what we've been talking about,
Yeah.
that emotional experience, and continuing, put some drops in that bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's hard to say, and also I think people might feel bored in a relationship, especially if we're coming back to kind of like our anxious attachment theme a little bit here today, is that the anxiously attached could start to feel a little bit bored in a relationship at times because they've got maybe this romanticized version in their head
Mm-hmm.
of like really heavy flowery love,
Mm-hmm.
and that boredom can also set in some panic.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's not how it's supposed to be. Oh, they don't love me. Oh, this and that. But it's also kind of what happens. Like the daily routines of life,
Mm-hmm.
they come into play, and it's sometimes not terribly exciting.
Yeah. How important is, you mentioned this earlier in when you first met your wife, how important is playfulness in a
Oh
relationship?
man, I think it's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was single, I live in Hawaii now, and I was living in Hawaii at this time. And I remember, the other, like, I guess, women in the community, I'll call them auntie, auntie so and so, auntie so and so, and one of these kind of older aunties that's like maybe full of some more wisdom. One
Mm-hmm.
day she was telling me, she says, Trevor, like whatever you do and whoever you look for, just make sure that she fun, is how she said
That
it.
she fun.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
make sure that she fun. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. And at the time I was like, yeah, all right. And I didn't give it much thought after that, but I found that to be one of the most profound pieces of
Yeah.
advice, because and it's back to the idea of, does she suffer well? I
Yeah.
saw in Elise, I was like, she turns to fun
Mm-hmm.
when suffering happens, because what else are you supposed
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah.
Right? Like when stuff hits the fan and it's crazy, sometimes we will just turn to each other and just laugh our heads off.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is nuts that all of these things just happened. But yeah, if a person can do that in the face of suffering, if they can have fun and they can laugh,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you're going to be able to tackle a lot of stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. I would wear that T-shirt that says "Make sure she fine."
Yeah. We should get some t-shirts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I also, man, you've said it a few times, but I love that phrase "suffering well."
Yeah.
It's such a powerful thing because we all suffer,
Yeah.
right? So might as well do it well.
Yeah.
Might as well do it in some sort of graceful way that doesn't make people's lives around you hell,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's deeply important.
Yeah. What for you has been your sort of evolution of the relationship you have with God?
Oh man, this is probably the most influential factor when it comes to my own personal healing around
Mm-hmm.
the anxious attachment
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
right? And um, it's a factor that it isn't spoken about a lot online and whatnot, but
Mm-hmm.
this is how it went for me. That the more I learned to trust God, the more I learned to let go of outcomes. I believed his plan was bigger than mine, even
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't see it.
Yeah.
And in that, I find comfort. It no longer was that important whether this first date went well,
Mm-hmm.
whether I get that text back, whether, 4 or 5 dates in, she ghosts me or not. All of it, as long as I'm trying to listen to God and trust in his plan, all of it's part of my plan.
Yeah.
Because his plan is ultimately loving,
Yeah.
ultimately graceful. And I don't believe that God wants us to suffer a second longer than we need to.
Yeah.
And need to is the key word there. It is to teach us, to grow us, to help us learn and become somebody that he knows that we can be. And as soon as you see it that way, you kind of walk around with this invisible, I don't know, you walk around with this invisible shield where nothing seems to affect you quite as deeply.
Yeah.
It's not reckless fearlessness, but it's courage that's grounded in something real,
Yeah.
which is God's got a bigger plan than I do.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
It's kind of some stoicism
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, have you had to wrestle with your faith much in your life?
I guess in what way?
Just in just in sort of coming to terms with what you believe and like what you said about trusting God and stuff, has that come easily?
Um, no, because there is a part of me that is terrified to trust God.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that thinks I need to drive the bus
Mm-hmm.
and I can't sit in the back seat and let him drive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That part of me is the inner child part,
Yeah.
we might call it,
Yeah.
right?
But he's not allowed to drive.
No, he's too young.
Yeah.
It's like getting your car seat.
Yeah.
Here's your juice box. Like, get back there.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard to let go of that and hard to trust. And honestly, it's a lifelong pursuit. I was pursuing that years ago in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of this healing journey that I'm talking about. And quite literally this year, I'm making a theme where all I am studying as far as, spiritual literature and things like that is all about trusting God, surrendering, because I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
I want to keep learning how to do it. And I think the cheat answer is, well, I don't know if I'm actually going to ever get there,
Yeah.
whatever there means.
Right.
I'm going to get closer, and the closer I get, the more at peace I become.
Yeah. Do you and your wife have kids?
We have one.
You have
Yep.
one.
1.5 years old.
Tell me what that's been like as far as sort of, I don't know, does that increase your love you have with your spouse?
Oh, yeah.
Just the fact that you have created a human together?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely.
Yeah.
And also when you have some sort of shared purpose and meaning, the Gottman research just shows this from like a real evidence-based standpoint, that's an important pillar for building a strong and healthy relationship, is
Mhm.
shared purpose and meaning. There's nothing like that than having a kid together.
Yeah.
Like you are full on. Almost everything in life is around like, okay, what are we going to do with him? Somebody got to watch him. Got to make sure he's fed. Do this.
Yeah.
I'm on your team. And we're fully in it together. And it's really meaningful, especially because when you nurture a child together, you get really cool, almost instant feedback. I mean, he grows like crazy every single month.
Yeah.
He learns new stuff. Yesterday, he learned how to blow kisses. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, look
Right.
at this. And that's a result of all of the work that we're putting in. And so it's deeply rewarding,
Mhm.
visible reward that you get all of the time. You're doing it as a team. And when you have the greater purpose in mind, other than just keep this thing alive,
Yeah.
it's bigger, right? It's like help him build confidence, help him learn how to trust,
Yeah.
to feel love, all of these cool things. Man, that's so bonding.
Well, and it's got to be helpful for you doing inner child work to have a child right there, because you have such compassion and perfect unconditional love for your child, and you're seeing it all in real time. But remembering yourself as a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old sometimes is a little murky,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
and you don't really remember what you were thinking,
No.
you know,
No.
and why you did something. But you're right here with this kid that's trying to learn how to walk and talk and everything, and you just have that perfect compassion for him.
Yeah.
So it's got to sort of be helpful to your journey if you're trying to heal your inner child.
Yeah. My wife the other day, she's like, "Do you ever feel like you're raising yourself?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "He looks exactly like you.
Yeah.
He's got the same energy, like everything about him." And that kind of took me back in that moment because I was like, And I started to reflect on a moment the other day when I was less patient with him. He was trying to go to bed. He was mad, and I was holding him, and he was just kind of freaking out, and he bit my shoulder, and I was like, "Ugh." And it was like, I have to hand him off to her because I was like, this kid, I'm not going to be a good dad right now. I need to tap out. And I remember thinking about that and going, wow, like what if I really did get the opportunity to nurture myself? Like as physical and real and tangible as I get to nurture my son.
Yeah.
And what would that be like? And what kind of experiences can I create for him that will shape the way he feels about himself, others, love, God, everything in the future? And I don't know, I think it sobered me up a bit more. I was already keen to the importance of what I'm doing here as a dad, but I think it really landed for me in that moment where I was like, wow, I kind of am raising myself, I guess.
Yeah, that's really cool insight. If you could kind of go back and give, like, I don't know, 14-year-old Trevor some advice, Trevor that is a little anxious in crowds and groups and socially, and all the work you've done since, what would be some words of comfort you would maybe tell him?
I would try to portray, this happened yesterday, actually. Yesterday, I came off the mountain skiing, and my wife was up there with me. She wasn't skiing, and she was with our son. And I come back to the car, and they're sitting in the front seat, and Elise is looking out the window. She's kind of trying to point to me to have my son look. She goes, "Tommy, there's Dad." And I'm coming off the mountain. It's beautiful. I'm a little worn down from my activity, doing the thing that I loved the most growing up, which was skiing. And there they are, just kind of sitting in this like golden sunlight. It was kind of this moment where it's like, wow. And I walk up, and Tommy like reaches his head out the window to give me a little kiss. He's like a year and a half old, little pucker face. And I thought, if I could show my past self any moment, it would be this.
Oh, wow.
And I would say, "Can you see what's here?"
Yeah.
Like, do not worry. I say, dang it, Trevor, just trust yourself, trust God, and trust that someone out there is right for you, and that God's going to figure out how to find her.
Yeah.
It's not your responsibility. You are worthy of this.
Yeah.
Kind of all of those messages in one.
Yeah.
And I told that to my dad after the experience because he really helped me through the hardest moments. I would call him often, and he was just like, wow, that is really powerful and meaningful.
Yeah. I love the idea of sort of just freeze framing a moment and then going into your past and being like, "Yo, check this out.
Look at this." Yeah.
Yeah. I've had moments where, because I try to, like, one of the things I really try to do is be present and just really feel things when they happen. And because it's easy to look back and be like, "Oh, that was awesome." But I love feeling the beauty in the moment, And so there's been moments where I've been out with friends or someone I'm dating, and it's like when you're on the scooters in the rain, it just feels like a perfect moment in existence.
Totally.
And maybe it's not monumental, but I love kind of honing in on that moment and then saying, "You know what? If my whole life led me to this moment only, it would be worth it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, like, it kind of goes back to that quote. It's like, that's enough for me, maybe.
Oh, yeah. And you know what's so cool about that is that, like, you're describing a process where you are creating that moment based on your intention and awareness. It's not that your life is full of all of these little golden coins that happen to just plop into your path and you're just so fortunate. It's that you're taking what might be a mundane experience, as you've described it, like something pretty simple that might go unnoticed, and you're giving it that attention that makes it an experience.
Yeah.
And man, you do that over and over again. Again, that's the internal environment of safety. I create these magical moments that are impactful out of everything.
Yeah.
Even telling the story again, I feel it here. And I go, oh, this is a moment. I want to remember this podcast. That felt really good. And that was meaningful for me. I got one today. Ooh, that
Yeah.
feels nice.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, dude, one of those days is like with my ex, we just went bowling. It was one of those days.
Right?
And I'll never forget it, darn it.
Yeah.
And it was in some, grungy bowling alley.
Of course.
But it was just, I don't know. It was a magical moment for a host of reasons. But I just love like recognizing that sometimes that's all you need is little moments in life. And they kind of carry you on to the next little beautiful moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk about that in another application in my the Secure Self Club, where I talk about just grounded awareness that brings safety. Because most of the time, in most environments that you're in, you can probably touch something, smell something, see something or like, I guess, feel something that brings a sense of safety. And it can help you feel calm. The energy is calm, right? I look around this room, we've got cameras and all this stuff, and that doesn't do a ton for me. But I mean, even just this little plant over here, I'm like, oh, I love that. It's green.
Yeah.
It seems nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. You're sitting in front of me. You're a human being. I enjoy being in your presence. I'm being keenly aware of the things that can help me feel a little bit more safe,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more grounded. And I'm either just aware of them and deciding that I'm going to let myself be affected by those things, or I'm going to create them. I'm big on creating your own environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Light your candles, turn on your nice music, get your lamps and turn off your overhead lights so it's nice and warm and cozy in your room. Those kind of things. It's like simple little things that you can create that internal environment of safety where you're filling up your own cup and you're no longer requiring other people to fill up your cup. They are secondary caretakers of your soul.
Yeah.
You are the primary.
Yeah, I like that. As you've like grown your social media presence and you've just been making videos for years,
Yeah.
and now you have this program and you're doing so many things. How have you sort of struck a good balance of how much time you spend on this bad boy?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to tell you that I know. I don't know. I think you just got to be aware of your emotional temperature.
Yeah.
Honestly. And sometimes, you're going to run a little too hot
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to working
Mm-hmm.
or focusing on the things that maybe don't need your focus or whatever. And I don't think there's anyone who's like, well, yeah, I maintain this pretty well all the time.
I got to figure it out.
Yeah. No, it's usually like, ebbs and flows, and you continue to kind of move yourself to the middle. Speaking of bowling, it's like, I need bumper lanes in life, right?
Right.
Keep the ball going where it's going to go. And sometimes I'm going to hit those bumpers real hard and realize, ooh, I'm overextending myself right now.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite like books or psychologists or therapists that you follow and you love?
Yeah. So it's funny, that'll change depending on like what I'm into at the moment, I guess. But some of the core approaches or theories that guide a lot of what we do. So in the Secure Self Club, we've kind of taken different theories from a variety of approaches and taken what's relevant out of them and kind of created a new approach unique to what we're doing. But I would say the backbone of what we do draws from emotionally focused therapy, which emotionally focused therapy is famous for its work in couples.
Okay.
Sue Johnson founded it. She just recently passed away of cancer, I believe. And it's one of the most successful models around building healthy, secure attachment or relationships between two adults in a romantic relationship. But what it's not as well known for, and if I'm wrong, someone correct me, but I believe that it actually started as an individual approach, emotionally focused therapy for the individual. And it's very attachment related. And so a good place to start there are things like what's her name? Julie Manano or something like that, created a book called Secure Love. That one's great. Or anything written by Sue Johnson is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I also draw a lot of ideas from internal family systems. Richard Schwartz. I'm reading right now for the second time. You Are the One That You're Looking For, or something like that. I'm
Oh,
sure if
cool.
people look for it,
Yeah.
and it is basically founded under the idea of like, hey, more date nights isn't what you need, or all these advice that we get in, even in therapy, isn't really what you need. It's you need to learn how to be the primary caretaker of your inner child,
Yeah.
of your wounded parts, and fill your cup, and then allow your partner to kind of be that secondary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful book. Love it. That's a great source of inspiration for me.
Yeah. How important for you are love languages?
Man, I don't really talk about them a lot,
Yeah.
honestly. So maybe not that
Yeah.
important, but
Do
it's weird
you
to say that.
do you I would say, but just in your own relationship, like knowing yours versus your wife's,
Yeah.
is there some dissonance if you don't share love languages? Is there some struggle?
Yeah, there can be. I will say, like, understanding how someone feels loved is clearly important. I
Yeah.
guess the banner of love languages I don't use as much, but
Mhm.
like understanding how a person feels loved and what they need is deeply important. And again, I think it all starts with doing that for yourself first, right? It's kind of like the same idea of what are my unmet emotional needs?
Yeah.
Usually that's also in line with your love languages,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you weren't praised much, if you didn't, weren't recognized, maybe you do like those words of
Mm,
affirmation a little
yeah.
bit more.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm longing for the thing that I was missing. Okay, good. Like, give that to yourself first. And so there's maybe a deeper story to some
Mm.
of these love languages that we recognize. And we can be an active part of healing our partner's wounds. Not that it's our
Yeah,
responsibility,
yeah.
right? We're secondary when it comes to taking care of them. They're in charge of that. But what we can do is we can be an active secondary participant in helping our partner heal their wounds when we recognize what unmet emotional needs they might have, and we seek to fill those needs through our own expressions of love. I'm going to tell you that you're amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to you because you didn't get that. I'm going to listen to your emotions and tell you that it's okay to feel that way if you didn't have that. I'm
Right.
going to show up on time if you always felt anxious that people weren't going to be there for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to become keenly aware of that and be part of it. And when I fail to do those things perfectly, I also know that you're taking responsibility on making sure that you're still okay.
Yeah. And I think when you really, really love someone, doing those things, they're just easy
Yeah.
because you just care about them so much.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a good sign if you're dating someone and you're like, these acts of kindness or service or love are so hard for me. It's
Mm,
like maybe you, I don't know, maybe you don't love that person as much as you should.
yeah. Yeah. And it also it's funny because it's so complicated too, because it also might be a sign that maybe the person that you're dating, maybe they are demanding from the relationship more than the relationship can provide from a
Mm.
place of woundedness.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky balance, because I don't want to sit here and tell people like, no, you shouldn't ask for what you need
Mm-hmm.
because that's coming from an anxious, wounded place. Well, that's not the truth. It's a bit of a balance and a continual check-in on, okay, am I filling up my own cup, and are there still needs?
Yeah.
Yes, that will be definitely true. So it's a tricky balance to strike,
Yeah.
of knowing like how much to ask for and what's kind of your responsibility on filling your own cup.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, well, Trevor, we'll wrap this up. I like to end just kind of turning the mics around and seeing if you have any questions for me. I know you don't even know me, but
Oh man, no. I guess I'm curious, very therapist brained of me.
hmm
What has been your experience in our conversation today? What have you felt? What have you noticed? I'm the emotional experience creates transformation guide. So I'm
yeah,
curious, what are you experiencing as we chat?
yeah. I feel like I was really excited to talk to you because I've heard so much about anxious attachment,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's kind of obsessed with like, what personality type are you and what
Yeah.
what attachment style are you? And sometimes I'm kind of like, I don't even know if you guys know
What that means?
what that means, you know? And so I loved getting, some tighter definitions and explanations and examples about it. But what I really got from this conversation was because I've been more, even though I'm a very emotional and spiritual person, I've always felt a little uneasy about like talking to my inner child. It feels a little
woo woo.
a little woo woo.
Yep.
You know?
Totally.
But I loved how you framed it, and I loved, I guess it just opened my eyes a little bit to like, maybe I need to give little guy some love, you know? And
That's cool.
And I've always like sort of subconsciously given him that love.
Yeah.
But I think there's some real power in audibly saying it out loud.
There is.
Or, you know, I'm a writer, maybe writing it down. I love the idea of writing a long letter to myself and just seeing what comes out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, it's why I love doing these podcasts. I feel like I come out of this a little more healed, a little more alive, a little more full, and that's enough for me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
you're blessed to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming out, man.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it. And you know, we'll put your links in the bio for people that want to join the Secure Club. What's it called?
Yeah, so the Secure Self Club.
Okay.
Honestly, a great place to start too is I've got some just free resources, like like we have a training called From Anxious to Secure. It's free, and it just talks about kind of 4 essential elements that you're probably missing in your healing journey, even if you're doing all the right things, going to therapy, reading the books and the podcasts and everything else, where we kind of nail down, okay, these are the things that you're probably missing if you're not yet feeling secure. And I just tell people, start there. Like, I don't expect you to trust me enough to, you know, join this program that you pay for. It's like, yeah, go get something free.
Right. Sweet. Okay. You're the man.
Hey, thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.